Ben and I had a really rocky start to our marriage.
We fought constantly going back to even when we were dating.
But one day, early in our marriage, we came up with a 30-day challenge for ourselves that literally transformed our marriage without even having to go to a therapist or a counselor.
It was super practical, and today we're going to share it with you and tell some stories about what brought us to that breaking point.
When you finish the episode, we hope you'll do us a favor and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you hear this. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can also watch the show.
This is the Balanced Family Podcast with Ben
and Jessica. There's a lot to balance when you have a family. Marriage, kids, health, career, while you're trying to balance all the opinions out there on how to do things right.
Today, we'll cut through the noise, tackle hard questions, and share stories as we try to get to the heart of the things that really matter. So I'm excited about this one because last episode we argued about where we had the conversation about the founding of balanced families.
True.
You thought it was on the porch. I thought it was in the bathroom.
Definitely the porch.
Our timelines on this story are way off too. I mean, I just know you're mistaken, but it's not going to detract from the story though.
Everyone wants authentic. Well, you're getting it. Here we are, authentically us.
Yeah.
Who we are. And we're talking about a topic that we're going to get real honest real quick.
Yeah.
Because the title is called How We Saved Our Marriage in 30 Days Without a Therapist. And everything we're going to share is true and honest. We have our mugs also that say, I love my spouse, which you may question.
Good reminder.
For a little while we share this story.
How long did we date?
That's a good question.
Before we were engaged.
Well, do you count the break?
When you take a break, do you count? No, you can't. Well,
so like we kind of sort of dated for 2 months and then we took a break for 3 months and then we got back together. It would have been May of 2010 was when we got back together. Mm-hmm. And then we dated for 8 months until we got engaged.
You got engaged in January?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of 2011. So
then married 2011 June.
So not a ton of time, but we were really good friends for a long time before we even started dating. It was kind of one of those like, we were very good friends.
Yeah.
Had a crush on each other, I think, for a while.
Definitely.
Didn't say anything.
So when did we start having big arguments?
I think once we started dating again in that May, we kind of went from like 0 to 60. We became serious, I think, very quickly. And because of that, we started arguing more.
Yeah.
I remember that fall. Okay, so we started our master's program that fall together. We were in a lot of the same classes together. We had student teaching as well throughout the week, but we went to our classes together. I have vivid memories of us arguing on campus, kind of all over the place that whole fall of 2010. So we both are very passionate people and that's just who we are. And I think once we became a little closer, we started putting our guard down, which therefore meant that we started arguing because we're both very argumentative people.
Yeah, we're not the type that stuff things down.
No.
And if we have a fault,
no silent treatment here.
Yeah, there ain't no silent treatment. It's like loud treatment.
Yeah.
If like we are outspoken about what our thoughts are to a fault.
100%.
Both of us.
100%.
And
we wear emotions on our sleeves. You know immediately if you look at one of us how we're feeling.
Yeah, which you would, like a lot of couples have a nice balance where there's like the quiet, gentle one, the patient
the
one.
more patient one. Yeah.
And I'm just like, man, that's got to be nice.
Yeah, because we both like, yeah.
Now, over many years of growing up,
it's true. We're not really like that
developing
as much anymore.
and I would say, and we'll get to that, our patience with one another is like infinitely more than it was in the beginning. I remember when we were dating how much I loved you and just wanted to be with you and wanted to marry you.
It's very sweet.
But like, oh my gosh, like, can we not talk about anything without getting in an argument?
Yeah, we argued a lot from what I remember.
Did that ever make you feel like, could we work?
Honestly, because I had argued with pretty much every single person I had ever dated before you and all of my family. I was like, this is just another day in the life of Jessica. I'm such an opinionated person.
Wow.
Which is why the fact that we're balanced is miraculous is because I actually have a lot of opinions about stuff and I can be very stubborn. And so can you. You are incredibly opinionated.
Yeah.
And you also can be very stubborn. Did you have second guesses?
I never did. Like I knew from very early on, like you were my soulmate. I just knew it. I absolutely adored you. But all of the mentors in our lives, the older couples kept telling us to like, just take it slow. Like
Slow down.
even if
Yeah.
you know you love that person, even if you know you think you'll eventually get married, like there's wisdom in just taking it slow. And because it's a discovery process. Like I totally get that.
100%.
Like,
I think if we had been left up to our own devices, we would have gotten married that summer.
yeah. And that would have been bad. Really
after,
bad. Like
2 months of dating.
I mean, and we'll get to our first year of marriage too, but I mean, even
Oh my gosh.
with how turbulent that was, it's just like, and that it would have been even worse if we hadn't have been counseled by the people that helped us out.
Yeah, we had a lot of mentors that we were very open with and shared a lot with about our relationship. And I'm really grateful for that.
But it's funny you talking about, so you said you're real stubborn. Mm-hmm. I was stubborn in a different way. What would you describe that stubbornness like?
I think yours is a little, you have to see every angle to every problem. So it's actually a little bit less maybe stubbornness as much as it is like you have to like look at every angle and really fully see every angle before you can even really say what you mean, and then also either agree or disagree with me, and then we can finally get to actually coming to a consensus. So
yeah.
And I very much was like a let's go,
You know, that's a good point about my flaws. Thanks for bringing up some of my flaws. But
you're my soulmate too. Does that make you feel better?
I think when I was that young, a lot of times I didn't even know what I wanted.
Yeah. Wait, how old were we? We
got married when I was 22, 23.
Yeah, I was 23, 24.
But I would say there would be times we'd argue, and it wouldn't even be that. I think I was really insecure and indecisive. I didn't know what I wanted.
True.
I just know I didn't like your idea.
That's true.
All right, it was like
I didn't drive me nuts because I'm just like, so you don't have an opinion, but you have an opinion.
But the yours is wrong.
Yeah, and I like immediately had an opinion, and I used to be told I should be a lawyer. If I have a logical sequence in my brain, I can be very stubborn and be like, this is the way it is. Period.
One of my funniest memories of you is like on a big argument, I think driving to your parents' house in rural eastern Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And I remember got to a point where you had just had enough. And actually this happened.
I know where you're going with this one.
I think this happened twice.
It did.
Once when I was driving, once when you were driving. The first time I was probably driving, and you were just like, done, stop the car.
I got out
oh my
of
gosh,
the car.
you got out of the car and just started walking. It was like you just started walking. It was like
I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out.
Yeah.
I had to like
that
take
is the worst feeling.
A break, And when you're driving for hours, you can't really do that.
Yeah. But I just remember thinking like, what is the plan here?
I was going to walk.
I probably put my head out the window and yelled out like, what is your plan here?
Yeah. It's very dramatic. I was also very dramatic.
Yeah. Well, I think it happened another time when you were driving. So you pulled over and got out. And I was in the passenger seat
true.
and you just started
I forgot
walking.
about that one too.
But
I'm a hoot.
Later on, we learned how to put boundaries around ourselves
and actually resolve our conflict.
And one of those was like, if you're arguing in the car, like don't just get out and start walking away and abandon the other person.
One would think that these would be things that you would know inherently, but no.
We're both passionate people.
We are.
And I think that's why we were passionate about fixing things in our marriage. And we were passionate about figuring this thing out with each other.
Yeah, because there's a lot of passionate people out there who then just kind of spin their wheels and never really, like you and I both understood that we both had flaws. And I think that was like a really important foundation that you and I both had, that we knew, even I, with how stubborn I was and everything, like I understood that I was wrong. It was hard for me to admit it in the moment, but usually I would eventually get there. But I did actually want to change. I actually kind of hated that part of myself because I knew that it was so frustrating to be around. And like, I wanted to change. And honestly, before you get married, it's really hard to change like a part of you before you actually then have that like daily friction.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, I think you and I both had a heart of wanting to change.
Exactly.
Which was, I think, a huge key and is what in the end really saved us in our marriage, is because even for all of our intensity, we did want to change.
Yeah. It's almost like the speed by which we process through things now is like lightning fast.
Yeah.
But it's the same process.
100%.
Where you got to be heard, but you also have to hear. and you want to be understood, but more importantly, you need to come to more understanding of what your spouse is saying, and our ability just to die to self and our preferences and listen and consider. That process was the same back then, but now it's just way faster.
Right.
To the point where it's like, I would describe our marriage as excellent, and we have very minimal conflict.
Very minimal conflict.
Because we work through
which is
so much of that drama.
Absolute miracle
from
God. Like if you knew us even 10 years ago, you'd be like, there's no way.
But I think it's important that we never let conflict be this thing of, I don't know if this is going to work. In our culture, there's a lot of talk about compatibility and this viewpoint that if you're compatible, that means it's like perfectly smooth. And that's actually just not true. The things that were compatible with us were the core values inside of us, but also just like a commitment to grow.
Right.
And without that commitment to grow and change and transform, we wouldn't have worked. Nothing. It's whether it's a marriage or anything in this world that involves people coming together. If one person is refusing to change, there's going to be major problems. But we had that foundation, and I think that's what allowed us to endure through all the crazy ups and downs that we had.
Yeah. So to summarize what you're saying, really, it's like you can have a compatible personality, but actually your foundation could be completely different. And then when you have pressure put on the system,
exactly,
like when you have babies, which we'll get to, you may have a really smooth relationship.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you get hit by a 2-ton truck and you're like, what is happening to my marriage? Anyway. And so I think for you and I, our personalities weren't exactly compatible on paper,
right?
But we had this similar foundation that ensured that we were going to be able to weather whatever storm came to us and actually move and grow and change. Because I think a lot of people talk about like, you have to like the person that you marry, how they are. And I mean, that's true, but like, I most certainly don't want to be the same at 60 that I was at 20.
Right.
Like, hopefully you're marrying someone that actually has a growth mindset.
Exactly.
And if not, like, I don't know, like if very many people that literally just are like, I don't really want to grow. I just want to be immature my entire life. And so I think for Ben and I, like we had a very high level of growth mindset. And that was what I think enabled us. We can go ahead and talk about our first year of marriage.
Well, like you said, you talked about those pressures.
Yeah.
That would be the first like big pressures, our first year of marriage.
Actually living together,
having
full-time.
to function together. And I remember when we got married, we were both unemployed. It was summer. We were trying to find teaching jobs. So we were both trying to find jobs that summer. And
we both worked 2 jobs each.
Yeah.
Remember?
It's funny you say that, like that we worked, because in my mind, I was just around you fighting all the time.
No, you remember you worked at home instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was
I worked senior adult care.
Yeah.
Where did you work?
I worked at Charlotte Russe and Pier 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Retail jobs.
But still, it was just so intense.
It was so intense.
And we went through marriage counseling that first year.
We did. Yeah. So we actually...
With a couple at our church.
Yeah, at our church. Like, help.
Yeah.
Oh, God bless them. Yes. I mean, we met with them for a season like weekly.
Yeah, it would start out like weekly and then might have gone to like bi-weekly and eventually once a month.
And that was like the first major block that I feel like that this isn't really what we're talking about, the 30 days that shaped our marriage. But that moment in time, they weren't necessarily like licensed counselors or anything like that. Like we didn't actually go to a formal marriage counseling.
Yeah.
But, they're elders in our church and, have a marriage that we really respect. And they were amazing at just helping Ben and I actually work through some of our conflict and be able to just find healthier ways to express ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think another thing that was
about
really important is they depressurized us.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you and I put a lot of pressure on ourselves and then we put a lot of pressure on each other.
Yeah.
Every issue is just like the world was going to crash. And if we didn't get this thing right, then
we had very big emotions too.
But I just remember them really depressurizing us and enjoying the ride and understanding it was normal too. And that was just how it was going to be. But I would say even after that first year, still have conflict, but it was after that first year, we had built a really strong foundation and even just good protocols for how to talk about things. Right. That we then were able to build and continue to mature on over the years. And then, so now we need to transition to the story that we disagree on when this happened.
Oh, that's right. So this is where I was going to transition to that, but because we actually agree on when this happened.
I don't know how to transition this because I disagree on when this happened.
Okay. So in my mind, we did this thing that we're about to share after we had our 3rd child. And the reason why I say this is because number one, I remember having this conversation in our bedroom and like us sitting in the bed and doing this thing that we did. Number 2, I remember sharing about it at our church. And when I shared about it at our church, we were in the building that we're currently in, which we moved into after our 3rd child. I am right.
Okay, this is interesting.
Right.
I do believe this happened in our bedroom, but I believe this conversation happened in our previous home, and I can visualize it.
Well, I can visualize it here. So.
But just like anything, I will admit, and this maybe should have been like footnotes for the last episode, you do have a superior memory than me.
Ben has a terrible memory. We got some historical basis here to say that I'm probably right.
Okay, so assuming you're right, because that's probably...
And it makes sense. Here's the other reason why I know it's right is because with my 3rd child, so we're moving into talking about why we needed to do this thing that we did for 30 days that really did help save our marriage. And something that a lot of people don't talk about is just actually people do talk about it, but postpartum and the effect the hormones have on the woman in the marriage, and things like postpartum anxiety, postpartum rage. I definitely experienced that, especially with our 3rd. And that's why I'm pretty sure that it was with our 3rd, because I have very vivid memories after I had her. This would have been 2018, 2019, somewhere in there, of just feeling like uncontrollable rage toward you and also toward just in my life in general. But Ben was definitely a contributing factor. And this is something that we talk about actually a lot, is a lot of where marital conflict comes into play after you have a baby is due to the mental load and the differences between the way in which a mom and a dad carry that mental load and the seeming gap between how much a mom has to do as a mom to care for her newborns, etc. Newborn. Hopefully you only have one. Maybe you have more than one if you have twins, but that's true. Just children in general. And then also just all the things around the house. And so I know for me, that was a huge part and a huge trigger for me of feeling like I'm drowning. I'm overwhelmed. I feel this intense rage, and I don't know why I feel that way. And I feel horrible about how I feel inside. So I not only feel rage, but I also feel horrible about the rage. And I feel like he's over there sipping his coffee, living the best life while I'm dying inside. That's dramatic. But that was honestly how I think I did feel a lot during that time period. And so that then came out in a myriad of ways, some of which was just picking fights. But I think more than anything around that picking fight was constantly micromanaging Ben, telling Ben all the things that I wish he would do differently, that he was doing wrong, that I wanted him to intuitively know to do. And like I see this on social media all the time. And anytime I ever talk about this subject, about dad's role postpartum and how dads are not socialized necessarily to care for babies. Everyone's like, well, I, as the woman, had to do the research. I didn't know anything either. And I get that. Like I was there, frustrated that Ben wouldn't just intuitively know how to do some stuff. I needed someone to take stuff off my plate. And I had this person that was capable of doing so, but I had to spell everything out for him. And that was so frustrating for me because it was like, I just want for you just to know what to do so that I can move on to something else. So that was a huge, like, churning moment inside of our marriage where we were just constantly going back and forth about that. And it was creating so much negativity in our home. I don't know. Do you want to describe how it was for you?
Well, I'd first say that when you've been married for years, you develop grooves.
It's true.
Like grooves in your communication, grooves in how you think toward your spouse, expectations that maybe aren't met, or constant disappointments to the point where you form a concept of your spouse that's not conscious.
Right.
And you're not sitting there like, I'm going to be just constantly critical of my spouse. But I think the pressures of life and the stresses we carry form that. And that's what we had got into, were grooves in how we communicated. From my end, it's kind of funny when you describe it that way. It's kind of like, well, what would I have to be critical toward you about? You're carrying all this, mental load, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I sound amazing, don't I?
But I think it sounds kind of funny, but my mental burden was the burden that you put on me.
Right.
Because I felt like I could never be good enough for you.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you're talking about this after our third kids. I wasn't a
You weren't
rookie
a novice.
dad.
Yeah.
Like, And I've always been involved and sacrificed and done my best. But I felt like I could not make you happy with anything I did. If it was like I loaded the dishwasher without you telling me, it was I loaded it wrong. It was like...
Or no, that I didn't want you to load the dishwasher.
Yeah,
I actually really wished you had did. This is true.
Like, why didn't I sweep?
Why didn't you actually sweep? That's really what I needed. I don't need you to... True fights that happen.
And there actually should be a whole nother episode about how I actually learned to finally really learn your values and how to actually get in sync with you about simple stuff like chores. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And I had to grow some skin and not be so insecure and stuff. But what this conversation is about is how we got into these grooves and how we viewed each other. Again, it wasn't conscious, but it was like inside, I started to view you as this tyrant. It was like stealing.
I kind of was. Okay. Like, it's true.
And then you had this viewpoint of me that just like, I couldn't do anything right.
I was also a stay-at-home mom at that time. So that added even more, which I say that working also would be very stressful because then you're coming home and then you have everything to do. But there is something intense about being home with children literally all day. And then like your husband gets home from work and you're like, help me.
I think that we've talked about this in couples in different configurations can relate to it, because if the husband's working and he comes home, there's that kind of frustration that it's just like, or expectation that he's going to come home and just like knock things out and save the day. But then if you're stay at home because you've been carrying all this all day and it's kind of weighs on you. And then you have the same deal. If both parents are working, there's an expectation that's going to be shared very equally and be this well-oiled machine that it takes time to build that.
Right.
Is that your family?
Right. And I think that's the point is that I was saying was that I think where a lot of friction comes is that there's expectations on the mom side for dad just intuitively knowing stuff. And I think that when you start from a place of, you idiot, how do you not know this? That's where I was kind of starting. And that was why it wasn't working. And sometimes you just have to actually take a step back and say, okay, where actually is he at with this? And how can we create systems to empower him to actually do what I wanted you to do? You know what I mean? And
But anyway,
that's a whole other podcast episode.
To get to how, I mean, just so you can kind of imagine us being in this groove of just super critical and just constantly bickering. Lots of passive aggressiveness. A lot.
Yes.
Like it eventually got to a point where we knew we needed to change, but didn't know how. And it was beyond just like talking to people about it. It was like we had to take some kind of action, and we've always been passionate about taking some kind of practical action. And it's amazing what small choices and small steps can lead to. And I don't know if it was your idea or my idea. I don't remember. I actually don't remember, which is kind of beautiful.
I think it actually was your idea.
Maybe so.
You tend to be the idea guy.
Yeah, maybe it was my idea. And I just remember thinking, hey, we are both super critical of each other. And I actually can't remember the last time we said something nice to each other.
Yeah,
you're exactly
right. Yeah.
Now, we'll pause. I will say this was at a peaceful time when we were talking about this.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this.
It was not right after a fight.
Yeah.
This was like...
I had my PJs on. I think it was at night.
It was night, comfortable, relaxed.
Yeah.
All is calm.
Children are sleeping.
A very good time to talk about...
Which is important.
That's the best time to talk about your marriage, is not when you're in the middle of a fight. Anyway, I was like, hey, I got an idea. And I literally didn't even know if this was going to make that much of a difference. I was just like, we got to try something. We're in this groove of criticalness.
Yeah.
How about this, Jessica? Every night before we go to bed for 30 days, let's say something positive about each other that we view. It can be about something you did in the day. It could be something about your character. It could be anything, but it needs to be like genuine and not just shallow or superficial. I don't even remember what your response was at that initial idea.
I'm laughing because I remember being like, I don't know if I can think of anything nice about you. I'm just being honest. I remember, and it's so funny, I'm thinking about our girls when we tell them to say something nice to each other and they're like, I like your hair.
I like your shoes.
I like your shoes. And I was like, what I was thinking was like, I like your shirt that you wore today. It actually was incredibly challenging. And here's why. Because it forced me to focus on someone other than myself, even when I felt actually tapped out. And that might sound horrible. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you had to do that, Jessica, you poor soul. But no, I was so incredibly self-righteous about my difficulty in that season of life of having 3 kids under 4, being a stay-at-home mom. You were working multiple jobs at that time. We had found out one of our daughters had a diagnosis. There was a lot going on. And I honestly just kind of felt like a pity party inside for myself. And when you suggested this for me, it forced me to actually have to think about someone other than myself, which is ironic because if you were to have looked at me at that time, you would have thought I was the most selfless, serving person of my family.
Right.
And I was incredibly selfless in that way. I was sacrificial.
Right.
But inside, it was like, oh, this is just so hard.
Yeah.
So when I had to actually sit down every day and think about something for real, nice that I would say to you about something, it was actually really challenging. I remember like there were times where I actually felt like a little embarrassed because like I actually had to, I don't even know if you know this, like it was so hard because maybe I was really frustrated at you for doing something stupid. The other thing is Ben sometimes he has a little bit of ADHD. Sometimes he'll forget things. It's a struggle sometimes for him. And I'm like firstborn, type A, on top of stuff all the time kind of person. And so again, like I had to really drop that stuff and find the value in you. Because here's the thing is that you don't just only bring your works to the value of our family. Like if that was actually like, hey, I really appreciate how you took out the trash without me asking. I couldn't have said that at that time.
Yeah.
And that's actually really sad. If that was the only thing that I found value in you for, like I might as well just hire someone. You know what I mean? Like I might as well hire a husband. Like at that point, like you are so much more than your works for the family. And that actually then cut deep to I am so much more than just my works for my family.
Wow. Yeah.
And like it got deep,
Yeah.
I think for me. And so it was so much more than this cutesy thing that we did for a month. Like it actually caused me to have to really change the way that I thought. And I think that was a huge part of that month for me, at least. So,
Man, a marriage is not a business partnership.
right.
Building a home
Yes.
is not an organization. Like it's an organism with flaws. Schedules get missed. Like people drop balls.
Right.
And what we both extracted from that 30 days is that we finally, it like broke something inside of us to quit looking at the X's and O's. And I think even for me, like you described that experience for you, for me, it was like, again, going back to the groove in my brain was just like, oh, she's so critical. She's always on my case. I'm never good enough. It was like, I started to see the value you bring to our home and the sacrifice and quit thinking about my own burden. That's the way a lot of guys feel. It's just like, she can't appreciate me. I do this.
Right.
And again, like you said, was a great point I never thought about. It's all works based. It's all, check boxes and like a performance eval.
Right.
And it's like, if you're judging your spouse like a performance eval, you'll always be disappointed.
Right. Your marriage will not do well while you have children because and as you get busier, because honestly, you get busier as you have more kids and they get into activities. I mean, Ben and I work sometimes like passing ships in terms of just our nightly activities now that we have older kids. Like if you don't actually deal with this when you have younger children, like you're just going to become more and more like roommates or business partners. And
But that 30 days where every night we had to say something like positive, I mean, it regrooved our brains. It literally transformed. I mean, the title sounds so like shocking, but it's true. Like that, it's incredible what happened that 30 days. Like it started out awkward, like you were saying. And I remember the same thing with me. It was just like having to like almost make up stuff.
Right.
And same thing, I could tell like when you were like, when it was just like,
I like your shirt. That's what it felt like I was
The funny thing is you don't like my shirts. You don't like my shoes. You couldn't say that. No, but like I could feel that awkwardness.
Yeah.
But by the end of the 30 days, it came natural. And that's the point is that when you focus on your spouse's contributions, not like a performance eval, but as a person and the color they bring to the home and why the home would not be the same without them, you truly start to appreciate the way that they've changed you as a person. Because that's the beautiful thing about marriage is that your spouse actually changes you if you perceive it right and diversifies you. And you go from having 3 colors to having 6 colors to your life. And I don't know who I would be without you. It's like without the outward practice of actually reflecting on that and articulating it, it would not have been conscious. And then therefore it would not have been deep into my heart as a position of appreciation and respect. And that's what we arrived at.
That was the end thing.
At the end of that 30 days, we had built
More respect.
We
for
had
each
like
other.
structurally built respect for each other.
Yep.
Like consciously. And it took work. And that sounds weird, but that's the thing is like marriage is work. Even the simple thing like building respect and appreciation.
Right.
There has to be strategic action or the pressures of life will absolutely deconstruct your views of that person because you're just pressured from all the
Right.
things going
That
on
was
in
the
life.
thing that was most challenging to me, was realizing like, oh, I actually just don't really inherently respect you.
Right.
And when I changed that, when I actually started respecting you, then everything got so much easier. Not to say that we never fought or had arguments, we did, but I was able to actually start changing. I think that's the thing, is that it was like, because I was so hung up and because I didn't really respect you, every single day I got more and more evidence for the reason why the way I felt was correct.
Yeah.
And so when I was finally able to actually deconstruct some of that evidence and to say, no, actually Ben brings a lot of value to my life, and I had to declare it every day, then I started respecting you more, which then meant that I started actually challenging and questioning for the first time some of my built positions that I had about my pity party, like I was talking about.
Yeah.
And that then I was actually finally able to start changing and stop micromanaging. It took a long time for me to be able to kind of come out of that, but I finally started moving forward.
Yeah.
And because postpartum was just a kind of a difficult time for me. And so, yeah, it massively changed our marriage, and it was incredible. And so if you're listening to this and you,
What challenge are you going to give yourselves
yeah, I mean,
for 30 days?
maybe you're totally resonating with what we're talking about and you're like, yo, I mean, I need to start this tomorrow. You should bring it up tonight or whenever you're listening to this, because I do think even if you don't have kids yet, even if you're currently expecting, it could be a great thing for you to kind of input into your relationship even before you have kids, but as a habit that then you can carry on and do even when you're like postpartum or have multiple kids.
Part of me becoming less critical of you was actually growing tougher skin and being more tolerant of the times that you might nitpick me a little bit. And that's this kind of the complex thing about marriage is like, there was a requirement for you to have more grace on me, on my shortcomings, but there was like more requirement for me to have more grace on you struggling to have grace.
Right.
And I know that 30 days that you could feel that when I started articulating the things that I appreciated about you, it was almost like you might chew me out a little bit and it's not a big deal. You know what I'm saying? It was like,
it also helped you step it up though too.
yeah. And that's the thing. I think we can talk all day about the things that I've had to do to change to actually become a better partner and things that we have to manage. But I know a wise mentor of ours that said almost in passing one time, he was just kind of like, yeah, marriage just makes you more tolerant. And it was like this little statement. And I just remember hearing it. It just like blew my mind. And it almost, well, it did. It like convicted me because I realized there were all these things that I wasn't tolerant of toward you.
Right.
It was like my patience really was conditional. And it reached its limits. People say, marriage is not 50-50, it's 100-100. And that's the truth. Like you're always giving and you can't keep score or you'll always be disappointed. But that's a big quality that we both gain toward each other is like, we're extremely tolerant. And, there's a verse that says love covers a multitude of sins. And that's really when love is done right, when it's truly your heart position toward your spouse, it really covers up a lot of their imperfections.
Yep.
And in my case, as a man that felt super pressured and like constantly nitpicked, it was like, it even covered up that. It allowed you to have time to like process through some of that really hard stuff for young moms.
Yeah.
That men can't relate to.
No, you can't.
But like once you had kind of the space and I wasn't constantly coming back at you with that. It
you
was
were
like,
very defensive and it made it hard.
It's like you were able to kind of process through that and recognize on your own account.
Yeah.
Like maybe I'm giving Ben a hard time and I needed to lay off. Yeah. So if there's things that you desire to see in your marriage as a couple, talk about it and then think of the practical action you can start with.
Yes.
Even if it's a 30-day challenge or a 60-day challenge or a 5-day challenge, the key is to make some kind of change.
Yep.
And
be proactive, be intentional.
You can't undo those grooves in your brain and in your heart overnight. Like you have to be consistent with it.
Yep.
So that's just our challenge. We've seen the fruit of it. And we hope that you'll experience that as well.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening today. It would mean so much to us if you left a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you heard this.
And let us know your thoughts on today's episode by leaving a comment on Spotify or YouTube, where you can also watch these episodes.